And for our third and final video here on the Rolling Stone for this week, it takes us to England, specifically to Pink News, the pro-LGBTQIA2+ news organization over there in England. Because as you know, June is Pride Month. Our social betters, the powers that be, they decreed that forever and ever and ever now, amen, June shall be known as Pride Month. 1/12 of the calendar will now be dedicated to about 2% of the global population. Until you also realize that October, by the same powers that be, was designated as LGBT History Month, so really 1/6 of the calendar was appropriated for ideological purposes, which is just kind of interesting when you think about it. But let's get back to this particular story. Headline: Gay conservative pundit Darren Grimes doesn't think LGBT people need pride anymore. He couldn't be more wrong. I don't know Darren Grimes from Adam, but I kind of feel sorry for him, because this is actually what he tweeted out on June 1st. Quote, "Gay men and women should be as free and equal as straight people. The good news, in 2020 they are. So why then do we need a Pride Month? What happened to that desire to be left alone? Now identity politics is king when being gay should be the least interesting thing about you." Like I said, I feel kind of sorry for him because he is still operating under a 2010 mentality, when the argument was, yeah, being gay, it's just as boring, just as bland as being straight, which was one of the arguments then used to say why gay and lesbians should get married. Which was actually the exact opposite of what was said in the 70s and the 80s, when being gay was supposed to be avant-garde. You stood apart. You didn't want to be like the common, vulgar, weak crowds that you were. In fact, gay people would call straight people breeders. Right? They were following the man. They were following nature. As Camille Paglia said, being homosexual, it was I forget exactly what she says in her book Sexual Persona, but she says that it is the greatest political act that you can actually do, because you are revolting against nature. That used to be the idea, that yes, you were a rebel and you were rebelling against the very fabric of nature itself. And so that made you cool, that made you hip. You weren't, going along with the rest of the crowd. You weren't going along with the man. And then in 1989, it changed, because of a book that was published called After the Ball, which was really a strategic manual about how to get society to accept the LGBTQIA2+ agenda. And one of the tactics which After the Ball articulated was that make it boring, make it dull, make it seem like it's just like every other relationship. And then people will say, oh, okay, it's no big deal. And then people will just accept it through osmosis. It was a tactic that proved very, very effective. Okay? So Darren Grimes, he's in this mentality. What he doesn't know is that in the last 10 years, in the last 5 years even, because we're coming upon the 5th year anniversary of the Obergefell decision, that having this idea makes you an enemy of your tribe. And just pause for a moment and think about that. In 5 years' time, the whole mentality on this particular issue has changed, has reversed 180 degrees. Whereas before, it's boring, it's just like any other relationship. Now, it is everything, and you do stand out. And you need to stand out. You stand out first because you are standing apart from the white, heteronormative, cisgendered patriarchy, which therefore is oppressing you, which means that you just have to cling to your identity even harder so that you can overthrow said patriarchal order. That's where we are now. And there are only two explanations for why this change came about. Either the narrative that it's just boring, it's just, as bland as milquetoast and the same as everything else. Either that was a carefully calculated lie in order to attain a specific political end, or the old idea, whoever makes these decisions, the old idea was discarded and the new idea was rammed through and made orthodoxy. Whichever one you choose, it's terrifying. It's terrifying if you think that, hey, we were deliberately lied to in order for a particular group to ram through a political agenda. It's also terrifying to think that in 5 years, not even the blink of an eye, in terms of human history, that an entire movement could change its outlook and its mentality, because it shows that there is no time being taken for new ideas. Old ideas are discarded, new ideas are replacing them without giving people a chance to actually debate, discuss, contemplate, or anything about these ideas. And even so, doing so, even suggesting that we should, hey, kind of slow down, take things one step at a time, that is a sign that you are the enemy. That is a sign that you are part of the aforementioned white, heteronormative, cisgendered patriarchy. So there is that. Now, what are some of the reasons why Josh Milton, who wrote this editorial in Pink News, what are some of the reasons why he says that Darren Grimes is wrong? He says, the first point, is that there are in fact members of the LGBT plus community who are not gay men and women. Because of course, there are trans people and trans rights are being discarded every day, which is really kind of funny because by making that point, they are actually reinforcing Darren Grimes' original point that everything is now identity politics. Which is actually kind of the point, because everything now is identity politics. Okay, they're not even arguing that you are wrong when you say everything is about identity politics. They freely admit that everything is about identity politics, and if you don't realize that, or if you're not on board with that, again, you are the enemy. He bridges that. He links his first point, that there are more people in the movement than just simply gay and lesbian people, with the second point, hate crimes against queer people are soaring in England and in Wales. And to support this, he talks about Melania Gaymonnet and Kristen Hannigan, whom he describes as a queer couple. Okay? Now that's rather disingenuous because they're both lesbian. Okay? So he uses a very interesting word. Okay? He uses queer instead of lesbian. Now, that might be seen as just, synonyms for the two, but Douglas Murray in his book, The Madness of Crowds, which was published last year, highly recommended, he says that there is actually a deeper reason why the word queer is now replacing gay and lesbian. Because queer now, that is if you are gay, lesbian, etc., but you are ideologically pure and politically active. So, you are not, for example, let me think of an example. Dave Rubin would be an example of someone who is, they would say, gay, but not queer, because he claims at least to be on the right. Someone like Professor Robert Oscar Lopez, who lived a gay lifestyle but is now married to a woman raising a family. Well, he's just a traitor. no matter what you say. Brandon Straka, let's say, who created the Walk Away movement in 2017, I want to say. He is gay, but he, of course, is not on the left, so he would be gay but not queer. Queer is when you are ideologically pure and you are down for the fight. Very much like Nicole Hannah-Jones, whom we spent all the last video talking about. She made the distinction between you can be racially black, but you don't have to be politically black. See, you can be your skin color can be black, but if you don't think as the left tells you to think, then you're not politically black, so you're only half black. So that is interesting that Josh Milton here, when he describes Melania Gaymonnet and Christine Hannigan, right, he describes them as queer instead of lesbian, which is what they were. They were lesbian. But they're the ones, if you remember, they were beaten on a bus. And everyone said at the time that this was an example of a homophobic crime. That this was an example of how much further we still had to go before there to be true equality. No one mentioned the fact that they were beaten up by a bunch of teenage boys, young boys, because they wouldn't publicly make out on the bus. These boys basically wanted live lesbian porn. Right? That's basically what they wanted. They wouldn't give it to them. These two women wouldn't give it to them. Good for them. And that's when they were assaulted. So it had nothing to do with the fact that they were lesbian. It was the fact that they were lesbians who weren't going to make out with each other in front of a group of horny bullies. That's what this was about. This is a terrible example, I mean, to use for this. Okay? And of course, we get the saying, pride is needed now more than ever, especially for black queer folk. Poland is now a patchwork of LGBT-free zones, even though that has more to do with the education in Polish schools, because the Poles looked at the sexual ideology that was coming through the system. Did you know, for example, that the World Health Organization, was saying that 4-year-old and 5-year-olds should be taught about condoms and masturbation? Did you know that? Did you know that the World Health Organization was saying globally that 4-year-olds and 5-year-olds should be taught that in the school system as part of sexual education, as sex ed? Yeah. The Poles looked at that insanity and the other stuff as well that has been pushed through the school system, and they said, no thank you, we don't want to subject our kids to that. Well, that was just an example of hate, when really it was about protecting childhood innocence and also protecting parental authority, parental supremacy, which is what it should be. Okay, so that, of course, that is a political agenda in and of itself. Conversion therapy. This is point number 6. Conversion therapy is still rampant and perfectly legal in Britain and beyond. That has nothing to do with anything, because no one is being forced to go to conversion therapy. No one is being forced to now. Especially now that the culture has switched and anything and everything LGBTQIA2+ is now applauded and lauded. Okay? No one is being forced to go to conversion therapy, which is actually an imprecise term, which is about, either not acting out on same-sex desires or trying to change your desires to heterosexual ones, okay? People who go there, for whatever reason, don't want to have same-sex desires anymore, okay? That is it. We are told, actually, this is a great point, we are told that choice is the greatest of all goods. It's the only thing. Choice, freedom of choice, freedom of choice, freedom of choice. Unless, of course, it's something like a woman wants to be a traditional stay-at-home mom. Unless it's someone who has same-sex desires but wants to go to therapy to try to see if he can get rid of them because he doesn't want them. Then all of a sudden, choice is bad. That's all that I'm going to say about that right now. Teachers in Britain wanted to teach LGBT+ lives. Parents fought back and protests rumbled for months. That's because they were talking about things that were wildly inappropriate for kindergarteners. Okay? Again, sex ed, LGBT+ lives, they have no business in grade schools, in kindergartens and grade schools, and the British equivalents of that. Especially when you don't even need the schools anymore, because now you have shows like She-Ra, Princess of Power, the remake of the old 80s cheese fest on Netflix, where they're introducing non-binary and lesbian characters left and right. Most shows actually are doing that now. Okay? Clifford, the Big Red Dog, the remake of that show. They introduced the neighbors to the little girl who owns Clifford. I don't know what her name is. But now, the little girl neighbor's parents are actually two moms. Okay? They're doing that with everything. Arthur, last year, one of the first Rolling Stones that we did when we started doing this on a weekly basis, right? The kids' show Arthur, they had a whole episode where one of, I think, Arthur's teachers is getting married, and they find out at the very end, oh, he's marrying a man. So you don't even need the schools anymore because the kids shows will indoctrinate your kids for you if you give them half a chance. And this actually is what really, this actually gets to the main core of why Darren Grimes is right and why Pink News is wrong. And why Pink News is actually just arguing for the continuation of Pride Month because they know that it's such a useful ideological weapon for them. When the culture celebrates, again, anything LGBTQIA2+, then your movement has won. Every day, pretty much, is Pride Day. Anyone just has to come out of the closet and tell their sob story or their triumph story or whatever, and people will applaud and flock to them and just say, oh my gosh, this is the greatest thing since sliced bread, this is wonderful. If everyone was still oppressed, you wouldn't be able to do that. In fact, now, of course, too, like I said, with children's shows, with more quote-unquote representation and diversity. Last week, we just talked about Pixar and its first protagonist, openly gay protagonist in a Pixar short, and the first gay kiss in a Pixar property of any kind. Right? The culture has been marinated with LGBTQIA2+ mentality, with the ideology, with the mentality. There is no reason, Darren Grimes is right, there is no reason to have Pride Month anymore. They try to say, oh, well, being gay and lesbian, it's still illegal in some of these months. Well, in some of these countries, like point number 5 that Josh Milton makes, in a dozen jurisdictions, the death penalty for gay sex is a daily reality. Like in Brunei, okay? What is Pride Month going to do to actually change that? If they're going to sentence you to death in places like Saudi Arabia and Iran and Brunei and places like that, if you're a guy and they catch you in bed with a guy, or if you're a woman and they catch you in bed with a woman, etc., then do you really think that you're going to be able to openly participate in gay pride? Do you really think that the authorities would be more lenient towards you if they didn't find you in bed with someone of the same sex as you, but if they just found you, huddled with your laptop or with your phone partaking in a digital gay pride parade? Do you really think so? No. So Pride Parade, it does nothing to actually change these laws. It does nothing about that. It's just a way for you to feel good, for Western elites to feel good, to virtue signal, to feel better about themselves, because they are much more tolerant, loving, and open-minded than these closed-minded fundamentalist Christian bigots over here, who probably also homeschool, as that Harvard professor has said, right? So even that doesn't make any sense. Darren Grimes is right. There is no reason to have Pride Month anymore because Pride has already taken over the culture. The only reason why Pink News says that it's absolutely imperative that we keep it is because they realize that it is still a useful ideological weapon to continue pounding, because they know that even in Western societies like the UK and in America, there are pockets of resistance. And the LGBTQIA2+ political movement is a totalitarian one. It is not content with just letting live and let live. They will not allow you to be silent. Just look at poor Jack Phillips, the Colorado baker. He finally won his Supreme Court case when he refused to make the gay wedding cake. What's happening to him now? He's being sued by a transgender individual because they deliberately went into his store to try to order a gender reveal cake for a transgender individual. The outside if I'm getting this right, the outside was supposed to be blue and then the inside was supposed to be pink because he was quote-unquote transitioning from male to female. Jack Phillips said, no, I'm sorry, this violates my religious beliefs. You know this because my name has been in the paper. And now he's being sued again, saying, well, since it's not about a wedding or marriage, it can't possibly violate his religious beliefs. That guy, that transgender individual, could have gotten a cake anywhere. Anywhere in Colorado. Bakers probably would have been tripping over their own feet and their own apron strings to be the person to bake that cake. But Jack Phillips resisted. And so Jack Phillips must be put in line. He must be punished until he either gives up, throws in the towel, raises the white flag, and bakes the damn cake. He bends a knee, kisses the ring, or he is absolutely crushed and he is used as an example so that no one will ever think about disobeying the ideology again. That is why Pride Month is still going on. And that is why Pink News, being the ideological outlet that it is, that's why they have to protect it, because they have to keep it going. But that's story number 3, gang. And so I'm going to wrap it up here. Have a great weekend. Stay dangerous. Stay safe. Okay? Especially if you live in any of these cities that have been rioting. And I will see you next time. Ciao.